Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Uncovered Dish Christian Leadership Podcast, the podcast that uncovers stories, equips leaders, and changes the world. And we are your hosts, James Lee
and Gabby Corbett. And joining us today is the Reverend Dr. F. Douglas Powe Jr., who is a renowned leader in church innovation and transformation. Dr. Powe is the current director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership and the James C. Logan Professor of Evangelism, Wesley Theological Seminary. He's also the author of several influential books, including The Adept Church and the co-author of Sustaining While Disrupting, The Challenge of Congregational Innovation. Dr. Powe, we're so glad to have you today. Thanks for being with us.
Well, I am happy to be here.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be great. We just talked to Dr. Weems last week, and so I'm excited to get to kind of continue this conversation. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you're now the director of the Lewis Center, but how did you get there? What have you seen in ministry? Where have you been? What's a little bit of your story?
Yeah, and just briefly, I started my academic career at St. Paul's School of Theology, where I was fortunate to work with Hal Knight, and we have written a couple of books together on evangelism. And really was fortunate for that mentorship and relationship. And after being at St. Paul for about 10 years, came to Wesley and started and the community engagement institute that we had during urban ministry and also evangelism. And then when Lovett decided that he wanted to sort of take a step back from directing, I drew the short stick and became the director of the Center, having to follow Lovett. I screw said all my life I followed Lovett. I don't know. Lovett was the president of St. Paul.
He was.
Yes. And then, following Wesley, and I'm now following him on the podcast. So my I really follow Lovett too. But seriously, though, it's been good. And working at the Lewis Center has been fantastic. Before I went back to seminary, I worked in the business world. So working at the Lewis Center has sort of helped me to intersect the work I did prior to going back to seminary, and then marrying what I enjoy in sort of ministry and mission. So getting to pull those two together. So I enjoy what I do, and I'm happy to be where I am.
That's excellent. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Powe. In your book, The Adept Church, you emphasize movement, describing an adept church as one that is capable of taking small steps in the direction that it needs to be going. And this reminded me of something that my mentor told me when I first started ministry as an early 20-something. He told me, James, churches do not like change. Churches do not like change. How do you move a piano in a church? 1 inch at a time. And at the time I thought that is a terrible, terrible advice. Like, we have to go in and change everything for Jesus. This was sort of my attitude. And over time, now about 12 years in ministry, I realized, it takes a lot of wisdom to change things incrementally. And so when leading a congregation from like an inward focus or service provision mentality to an outward missional focus, how can the pastor promote these incremental improvements while also avoiding the sometimes paralyzing image of an ideal congregation to which it strives but is out of reach?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And the struggle, I think, in any institution is you see where something could be done better or more effectively, and wanting to make a change to have that happen, but quickly realizing that people are really vested in the way things are currently, so that it's hard to make that change. The church is particularly slow in making changes. I like to say that the church is probably about 20, 25 years behind when it comes to you know, in many cases. So part of it in seriousness is there is a large sort of investment by people in terms of how they've been formed and shaped spiritually. And to think about somehow that being altered or moving, it feels like you're giving something up, right? So that you feel like there's a loss. If you read Heifetz in the book Leadership on the Line, they talk about the issue really isn't change. The issue is the sense people are losing something, and I think that's absolutely true. So that the reason it's so hard is people feel like they're losing something, and I say all of that background to say that, so in the book, what I am suggesting in the Adept Church is oftentimes, and you both know this well, that when you're in ministry, you get sent to these wonderful workshops or get sent to these wonderful places where they have really good individuals who are really successful, that have really big churches that are doing well. The challenge with that is that even if you do everything they say, your church is not going to become that church. I mean, that's it's just not realistic, right? I mean, and in most cases, your church probably should not become that church. And many of those speakers will say that. It's not that those speakers are trying to make you become them. But still, it's just sort of, this is held up as the ideal to which you should be moving. What I try to do in the book is say, the reality is that because change is going to be slow and these things are going to happen, let's think about, maybe not moving towards the ideal, but can we just take, to borrow from Lovett, the next fateful step on our journey of what this should look like, to move us ahead to becoming more missional, for what we do. And I borrow from Howard Thurman and use his language where he talked about swamp, reservoir, and canal. Now, he was writing during a time when swamps were really horrible things, so we have to remember that. We want to know today that they're not quite as bad as they're described by him in his initial writing. But if you think about many of our congregations using his language as a swamp, where they're very inwardly focused, they're not really interested in thinking about giving life or doing anything else, you're not going to all of a sudden become a canal where you're just this body of water that is free flowing and bodies of water are flowing into you and you're flowing into other bodies of waters. That the reality is, it's more likely you might be able to take a step maybe towards a reservoir, right? That a reservoir is something that is not a canal, but it's not a swamp. It's somewhere in the middle. And while it may not be the ideal place, it is doing ministry and helping the community in the work that it's doing. So what I'm suggesting is, let's think about it in that way, that we want to move from being inwardly focused. We're probably not going to jump to a canal in most cases, but can we take a step where we actually are doing something that is more missional in the community? And I think that's possible. So that, but then what you're saying to a congregation is, we're not going to try to become some mega church or something that we're not, but we can have an impact in that local elementary school, or we can have an impact with this particular group in the community. There are things that we can do to sort of take that sort of first step in our journey. And I think that's what is important, because once you start down that path, it becomes easier for the congregation to see that really we aren't losing what we maybe thought we would lose as we take this journey, that our faith still is intact as we become more missional. And that, this is not all bad, that we're not having to give everything up as we move in that direction.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important way to frame the conversation. And I think also a good reminder for particularly young clergy or clergy who are walking into their very first appointments, who are often, like James said, really excited about changing everything for Jesus. Um, and being on appointment number 4 for me, that is a journey we have all had to learn together. That these small steps, we're not going to tomorrow be the Church of the Resurrection.
That's right.
It's not, and like you said, it's not every church is called to be the Church of the Resurrection.
That's
Not
right.
every church is called to be some of the larger mega churches we see here in Jersey. And I think that is such a powerful way to start thinking through how do we make those small but faithful steps to where God is actually calling us to be. And so I wonder, what do you think, or could you give us some examples about what missionally focused or missionally minded ministry, particularly in our communities, and maybe not so much focused on our own, sanctuaries and whatnot, but what does it look like to go into the community and being engaged in really meaningful, missionally minded work and ministry?
Yeah, let me share sort of 3 examples and then talk more broadly about the question. I think the easy one that every congregation can participate in is Easter egg hunt. Typically, for most congregations, there's an Easter egg hunt every year. It's typically done at the church for the children of the church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A real easy thing to do is to move that outside on the church grounds, which gets it out of the building, or even better, to a local community park and invite the community. My wife is a United Methodist pastor, and one year they did this and put it on a social media thing. They were thinking like 50 people would show up, and 200 people showed up. So something that simple can have a huge sort of impact in terms of having people participate. That means there's a lot of follow-up that is important with that, and that is often so. I don't want us to think just going to the event itself, which is important, but then the key becomes how do we, faithfully not force people, but collect, names to follow up and share information about what else is going on with the congregation. But that is something every congregation absolutely can do and is easy. The next level, more congregations are doing, or I should say more congregations are moving towards more creative ministry with sort of fresh expressions. And one of those, in this particular case, it was a church in Texas, is doing sort of yoga outside on the lawn and building a liturgy, a Christian liturgy around that practice. So people who do this in this area anyway, sort of yoga, now have the opportunity to come and do this at the church, and there's a liturgy go around it where they will also be worshiping. So this is this one takes more work, more intentionality, and of course you got to actually have somebody who knows yoga, so to build this. But there are other ways to think of these faithful expressions that individuals are doing. But again, the idea in this case is it moves you out of your sanctuary and into sort of the community. And the third one, former student of mine who is in the Baltimore Washington Conference, Kristen Cooper, has Coop Soups, where literally wonderful ministry. You can Google, but goes to the farmers market and has built community back onto the farmers market, selling the soups to sort of help support ministry. But it's been in doing that, it has created ministry with the people at the farmers market itself. So that one even push you out there a little bit further. But in all of these cases, what is critically important is you're moving and engaging the community in some form or fashion. And I think what we have lost in the church to a certain extent is that we have become comfortable with sort of Field of Dreams, people coming to us and finding us. Another way to say it, actually, and I use this all the time, is that if you think about, we had that motto at one time, United Methodist Church, open doors, open hearts. And I said, it's a wonderful sort of slogan, but the problem is that it really, in some ways, is very inwardly focused, is that
It
we will
is.
open our doors and you can walk in, but we're not going to walk out of those doors, right? It was not about us getting out, it was about people coming to us.
Yeah.
What we have to
Wow.
do now is we really have to think about, people aren't going to seek us out, and many
Yeah.
people are not going to come into or darken a sort of church building. But many of these individuals really are seeking God and are seeking community. We have to go to them and help them to build that community sort of outside of the sanctuary. So that is why the question you asked is so important, and thinking about ways to do that within our communities is so important.
Yeah. But also going back to what you were saying earlier, Dr. Powe, someone might be listening to this podcast and say, oh, I will start a yoga ministry, or let me start a soup ministry for art, like a coop soup. That sounds awesome. I want to do one for our church. I think that I wanted to ask about the process of discernment, right? So every church is different. God's calling on every congregation is different. I think our role as pastors is often to identify the giftings and the callings of a particular faith community that we're appointed to. And so when leading an Adept church, what are some best practices of congregational discernment and evaluation and then decision making? How are we, not as church leaders or pastors, just doing things ourselves, but discerning and working together with the lay leadership and the community to discern where God is calling us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I believe what I'm about to share is important, just more generally in leadership. I am a strong believer in the vision and mission of the church. And particularly, if you think about the mission as that sort of statement or claim that helps direct our decisions, so that, as with anything, there are so many wonderful ideas that come, right? There's so many things that are great and we'd love to do them. And then the question becomes, well, how do we discern what we should be doing or what we should not be doing? We're going to talk about prayer and those things in a minute. But one of the first things I think we should be doing is looking at our mission and saying, does this fit our mission? And how does it fit our mission in terms of how we would actually practice and live it out? And we can say it doesn't fit our mission, then we can immediately say, wow, it's a great idea. This is probably not right for our congregation. Or if we say it does fit our mission, but we don't actually have a way to live it out, again, it probably doesn't make sense for our congregation. So really get into the habit of starting with our mission and making sure that what we're doing fits with our mission, I think is really important. Then what I would say is working then with our leadership team. In the book, I talk about my fascination with the pilots that are able to land on the aircraft carriers. That I'm amazed by that, and just think about, well, I want to know how they practice. Like, how do you practice? It feels to me like there are mistakes that are going to be made, but it doesn't feel like you can make a lot of mistakes in doing that.
Right.
But in talking about that, and the analogy I use is that if you think about that, there's a skill, a precision, but there's also a nimbleness. There's an awareness, and there's a collaboration. And thinking about that, the skill is that there is practice or practices that are needed to make that happen. And in leadership, I think that of course, if you're the pastor, you've got a seminary and you do other trainings, but we need to make sure our other team members are also getting learnings. I mean, the conferences, all of them offer different things. I mean, you don't have to go to seminary, but there are places where you can enhance your skill set so that we can do a better job of leadership of the congregation. I think that's important. The precision comes back to sort of thinking about the mission statement. Like when we're making decisions, I'm sure you sat in those meetings where you're supposed to be talking about chocolate chip cookies, but then you start talking about, you know, everything else under the sun, salad. You start talking about, where we should be going next week. I mean, but the conversation's supposed to be about chocolate chip cookies. So when you're making a decision, that precision is important. But then in the same breath, we have to be nimble. If we're not nimble, we can get trapped and not be able to adjust or be adept, as I talk about it, and what we're doing. So nimbleness is important. Awareness of not only sort of who is immediately around us, but awareness of the resources and everything outside of the congregation. We oftentimes reinvent the wheel in congregation, and we shouldn't be doing so. We should have a much better awareness that there are resources that are available, and then collaborate. I mean, don't think we have to do it ourselves. Collaborate with others in the community who are doing great work, and let's do it together. Let's find those partnerships and things that will work. So I think that this process can help with decision making. Of course, it's challenging because lay are volunteering in the work that they do. So they are, doing this after they've done their full-time job and everything else. In many of our cases, this is shifting. If you're a full-time elder, you get to think about this all day long and sit with this stuff all day long in a way that they do not. So we have to be aware, that is the case. So we just have to make sure that as we think about this, that again, this is where we need to think about what is the best use of our time and how can we use that to really help us to make those decisions that are going to help the church to be as missional as possible.
So you named skill and precision and nimbleness and collaboration. I love, when you first said collaboration, my head went collaborating with the lay leaders in our local church. I love that you said, what are the other organizations, other groups, maybe even other churches in the community, right, that are doing some of these works. I think about maybe a local church that's thinking, oh, we want to do a food pantry ministry, but there's a really good one down the street. How can we collaborate? When I was pastoring a church through COVID, we were asking, what can we do missionally? What is the need in the community? And there was another United Methodist church in the town over that was making sandwiches in a safe way. They had created a system, and they were feeding folks in the community who were not being fed or not being helped because a lot of these organizations were shutting down due to COVID. And we just partnered with them. And another church joined in. So these 3 small churches, we packed 10,000 meals in 2 years of feeding folks in the community. I think the collaboration piece we miss out on, especially when we start seeing ourselves within the walls of the church rather than really looking out.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
And
very
I do want
powerful.
to say though that you should collaborate with your lay people. I don't want to say
Oh
no.
yes, of course.
But we should expand that to others.
That end. Right. Absolutely. For the church leaders in the Greater New Jersey Conference, we have been working towards professional ethics training that are mandatory for our leaders over the last few years. And the sexual ethics training provided by the Lewis Center for Church Leadership was really, really helpful. So as ordained clergy, Gabby and I we agreed to it. We voted it in at annual conference, and it was mandatory for us to receive this training. And it was very, very powerful and effective. There were things that I wish I was taught more explicitly in seminary. A lot of the things were things that I think I learned from maybe mentors, but it was so valuable to have it within the training. So I want to thank you for that. What other resources does the Lewis Center for Church Leadership provide for congregational leaders?
Well, thank you for voting and approving that for the conference. And thank you for lifting up the Lewis Center, where I'm the director. The Lewis Center, I believe, is unique in that we have a sort of a range of resources. And one of the most important is free, which is Leading Ideas. So if you do not subscribe to Leading Ideas, it's a free e-newsletter. Churchleadership.com is our website, easy to remember, churchleadership.com, and you can go and subscribe. But there are a couple of we try to keep them short, but very practical articles that help leaders to do things within their congregation or try things that we believe can be helpful. So it's an opportunity to really get some sort of practical tools you can use that come out weekly. Also, one of the things I started when I took over as a podcast, of course, they should listen to Uncovered This, but Leading Ideas Talks, again, we offer and speak with individuals who go more in depth on things that can offer some really practical help to individuals. So that is also available for free. We also have paid resources. One of the things we're doing is called Pathways for Ministry, and you can also find this on our website. But Pathways for Ministry offers a range of resources for both lay and for clergy. So you could go in there and find individual classes that you could do yourself. If you're interested, but then also resources that you can do as a church that can help you in terms of, how do we engage the community better? We have a resource called Discover and Dream that a church team can go through and work through that. If you're an individual and you say, hey, I don't want to get a doctor of ministry yet as a clergy person, but I'm interested in enhancing my leadership skills, we have a Lewis Leadership certificate that would be perfect for individuals looking for that sort of thing. And then we just have classes that lay can take that can enhance the work that they're doing. So the Pathways to Ministry is a fabulous resource. Different prices depending on what the classes are, but that would be fantastic for many of your listeners.
That's excellent.
Amazing. Thank you.
Actually, I have another question that we maybe have not prepared you for. But I wonder, with all that you've learned in your time in leadership, and both with time pre-ministry and the business sector, and all of the experiences that you've had, coupled with all of the life experience and all the things that you've seen change over the years. If you could go back and tell early 20-year-old self, if you could meet Dr. Powe in his early 20s, what would you tell him? And in turn, what would you tell folks who are just starting off on their journeys into ministry?
Yeah, great question. What would I tell my early 20s self? I think a couple of things as I think about it now. Of course, this may change tomorrow, but today, I think one of the things that I would share is how important network. I think, some people come by naturally, but for many of us, we have sort of our group of friends that you hang out with that do things, and that's wonderful. You should not give that up. But networking is so critical. And being in knowing people and being able to have the resource of individuals, just in terms of regardless of what you do in life, particularly in ministry can just be extremely helpful. And I think that I know certainly when I was that age, I didn't think about how important that was. So to go into your other question, I would say to someone to start networking
Yeah.
is critical. So even though, people are going to want you to focus on those inwardly focused things, you need to make time for the networking piece also. So that is key. So that would be one thing. I think the other is really learning how to talk with people about money. So again, it's a skill that have learned as I've gone along. But in your 20s, again, it's not something you think about.
Right.
But if you're in ministry in particular, you're going to be asking people for money for various things, and becoming sort of comfortable with that, and also understanding people may say no, but it's not a rejection of you. It's other things that are taking place, but learning to ask people for money, I think, would be the other thing that I think would be critically important. And again, I would say to young people, take classes, do everything you can and learn about stewardship and creativity when it comes to, because I mean, you really are running your own small business at a church, nonprofit, in a manner of speaking. So and all nonprofits are always fundraising, so you have to be kind of comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So those would only be the two things that I would say. And they're related to each other in some ways, but those would be the two things that I think would be.
Yeah, when you just said that about how to ask folks for about money and how to talk about money, you saw Gabby and I just go, oh,
Yeah.
Because I think that just opened a whole can of worms. Dr. Powe, I think we need to invite you back for another episode to talk about that. I think every pastor wrestles with that. How do we talk about it? How do we ask for money, but with integrity, with honesty, and in a genuine way, without being misunderstood, right? I think there are a lot of folks out there who we see images of, let's say, pastors or other kind of leaders that ask for money in very manipulative or harmful ways. So how do we do it well?
Or
I think it's a
they're
big
using
thing too.
the money in ways that are not promoting the mission, and that's the fear, both on the side of those who are doing it genuinely to try to promote the mission, but also those who are giving. So
exactly.
So absolutely,
So Dr. Powe, please come back. We need to talk about that.
Yeah,
we'll have you back.
Yeah.
Well,
great question, though, Gabby. A really good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of nostalgic, sort of like thinking back on, my whole 11 years in ministry.
There you go.
And so that's always my question for folks. So
I want to say, Dr. Powe, thank you again for coming on the podcast. We do have one last question that we ask all of our guests. We are the Uncovered Dish podcast because we love covered dish dinners. As Methodists, we love food.
Absolutely.
And so here is our last question for you. If you can have one dish for the rest of your life, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, no variations, what would that one dish be?
I've actually asked this question in class.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go.
I've actually asked this question in class. Today, my answer is going to be chicken.
A particular kind of chicken?
If I'm going to say baked, if it's going to be the only thing I can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because at least if it's baked, it's going to be somewhat healthier. Fried is better, but if you're going to have the rest of it, baked is probably the way to go.
So I'm hearing, for health concerns, it's baked, but in actuality, it'll be fried. Okay.
Right. Fried is definitely much. It's much tastier, but you got to try to be healthy.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Powe, this was a great conversation. We learned so much. Thank you again for coming on the podcast. Again, folks, if you would love to learn more, you can go to churchleadership.com and to learn more about the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. Dr. Powe, if folks want to reach out to you, where can they connect with you?
It is easy. Please email me. It's dpowe@wesleyseminary.edu. And if you can't remember that, if you just go to the Lewis Center site or the Wesley site, you can easily find my email. And would love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Powe, thank you again for your time, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
And